So, hello all. So, we are going to discuss about a case study regarding a two-lane highway in the state of Durango, Mexico, particularly the environmental impact assessment in providing this particular project. The Durango, the city which is in Mexico, an average right way of the project of a national two-lane highway is about 60 meter, and it is further expansion of a 4-lane. The highway will be built to high specification with the intersection of bridges, crossroads, and pedestrians and cattle main and drainage networks. It's an area approximately 632.61 hectares. So this is Durango city, and it has a huge population. So the corridor in the first phase lies in the Mexican west coast. When the statement was environmental assessment statement was completed in 1995, the date of the commencement of the work has not been set. The main cities, the population as connecting main two major cities to Durango, it's about 3,48,000 inhabitants, and El Salto is about 39,000 population. There are local neighbors which have the corridors, connections with these corridors that vary in size and numbers of the inhabitants. So Mexico is almost a most populated city in the southern hemisphere, and this corridor connects a lot of local peoples with some amount of population. So the aim of the project is to facilitate the transportation for these peoples and to get access to the Pacific coast easily. The surrounding environment about this city is dry, and it has a temperate climate supporting a desert vegetation, and some elevated areas will have a coniferous vegetations too. They have some irrigated regions and rain-fed agricultural areas which consist of several streams which flows across this particular proposed project. The topography is highly varied. The topography consists of canyons, that is a small valleys, plateaus, hills, plains, which causes several streams, have different vegetation like temperate, coniferous, and deserts vegetation. So it's very difficult to implement a project here because we have to sacrifice a lot of environmental concerns. So in the EIA, the environmental impact assessment for this project was prepared in accordance with the Mexican environmental legislations. So the Mexican environmental legislation is taken by the federal authorities, and the statement was evaluated and it was reported. When the assessment was carried out, the project in its planning phase, and it was possible to propose impact prevention and mitigation measures that could consider and applied for the project managements and proposed implementation phases. So from technical point of view, the project was planned with all major works, typically of high specific highway constructions. In response to the typical condition of this area, there has a bridge up to 400 meters in length, which cuts up to a 30-meter height. The extraction of huge volume of construction material clearance as on the debris, which affects the species of the desert shrubs, and trees are not planted. So later it was planned well to plant this particular trees and recover these desert vegetations. So the project proponent must purchase more than 600 hectares of land right way legally, and they have to purchase privately and commonly owned plots too to widen and to implement the projects. So the city of Durango, it sometimes happen that the project proponent has not finished paying for the land acquiring has begun that created some issues during those days and during the 95 phase, but later it was been overcome. So in the social viewpoint, this generates ill feeling among the affected. Uh, so if a land has been acquired by a government and if the compensation is not been properly paid by the government, it produces an ill feeling. And even though the people they won't ready to give the land, but even if they are willing, the proper compensation should be given. It produces some ill feeling among the local population. So therefore, in this study, it was recommended that what is called freezing of highway right of way be completed before construction commencement in order to avoid conflicts with the owners. So the main environmental impact identified in this area is one is socio-economic impact, which due to affected private and commonly property land. So the private land and common property land has been affected, and the peoples who are the inhabitants, the local inhabitants depend on the land, get affected, and if they need a proper compensation. The impact on local climate, yes, by cutting down the trees and removing the soil surfaces and affecting the process which affects a local climate, air, and it affects the soil, surface water, geomorphical dynamics has been changed and the vegetation has been destroyed. What happened to the wildlife depending upon the vegetation and the land has been changed. So landscape are changed and inhabitants due to such action as clearing cuts, mining of the quarries, and these such an operations dumping these excavated areas in a particular dumping site also affects a lot of things. So the major impact which we identified in implementing the EIA, implementing these projects, the constraints or the impacts is a change in the local climate. The local climate is going on changing. It will change when we cut the vegetation and we remove certain things from the land. The presence of suspended particles, gas, smokes and noise, yes. By dredging, by doing this, what will happen? It creates a noise. And doing this project was create a lot of amount of smokes, gases and particles which will affect the quality of air. The air quality index has been reported that it has been affected a lot. Increase in the proneness of soil erosion. Once we cleared the forest, what happens? The plants which hold tightly the soil will become loosened. So immediate rainfall or a huge wind will carry away the soil surface. So removing vegetation will definitely affect soil erosion. And also by doing something, we have been losing the subsoil surfaces, which also changes pattern. An increase in solid particle suspended in the rivers. Yes, by doing this clearance, what will happen? The river water and streams will carry the suspended materials and they deposit a silt in the dams and in the river course water, which increase the waterbed level, causes some amount of flood in the future. An alteration of a natural pattern of drainage. Yes, a drainage was going in a particular direction depending upon the slope. But what happens? There is a real issue. We are doing these things. The natural slope pattern has been changed. So with the change in the natural slope pattern, what happens? The river takes another courses which affects the another region, and left this river as a piracy river, makes it dry and create a flood in some other regions. An intensification of an erosion and sedimentation has been doing by these rivers, which create a serious environmental issues. Change in the original topography, stability of the terrain gets affected. So when the original topography has been changed, the stability will be very, very reduced, because the original topography has been built from the billion of years. But if you suddenly change the original topography, what happens? The stability The stability of the terrain leads to a landslide and collapse of a particular land. So loss of a tree and desert scrubs, crops, etc. has been done here. The destruction of wildlife habitat by disturbing this ecosystem, we are definitely destructing the wildlife habitat and the creation of barriers to the movement. The visual impact due to this removal and cutting the things, embankments, and construction of materials creates a huge impact. So the soil pollution due to the accidental spilling of a fuel. So doing this project, we use a lot of machineries and we use a lot of things which has been running through a fuel. But accidental spillage of the fuel or grease or oil in the machinery and the equipments in the operating yard will definitely damage the soil quality, which in turn future affects the agriculture and species which involved in the soil. So after the environmental impact assessment or once the survey was completed, it was delivered that to the project proponent who had it revised internally. In accordance with the study results, proposed measures and conclusions and the proper determination of that some aspect of a project design are analyzed once more and modified to avoid such an environmental significant impacts. So there have been suggestions given by consulting with the local community and the authorities of the project implementation and the Mexican federal government. They came to a conclusion and they formed a assessment survey which they try to avoid these environmental impacts. So this was the case of the proposed sites for dumps. They proposed a particular site to dump the debris that would have located in somewhere, but not near the canyons, not near the streams, not near the rivers, and not near the curious woods and the desert scrub areas. So some these sites were avoided, and a separate site was given, and it has been planned not to affect these environmental things. So, looking at the picture, the greeneries has not been so much affected, but it has been formed somewhat balancing the situation. So, at the time of writing the report of EIS, the Federal Highway Bureau has been examined. So, it was said that although the highway is inclined in the communication and transportation sector of particular developmental program in 2002 or 2000, it apparently is not a current priority project, which is why a date has been set for the construction. So, in developing countries, particularly like Mexico, the consideration must be given at such important factors as the economy also determines things. Since the economy is very low, it will not allow certain things to happen. We need developmental projects with the effect of or with the balancing things around the projectile areas. So, faced with the insufficient public funds of the federal government, the program has been implemented and it has been operated with the 4-lane toll highway were leased for private and Mexican state governments. So certain environmental things has been considered and it has been reached, but certain things has not been compromised by the government because of their low economy and not able to spend much over the economic issues. So the project was before 94. The highway kilometer needed by the country and the investment required to build them have not been met partly due to the economic crisis of 94. Construction cost exceeds the limit. So toll charges was high. So traffic flow turned out to be much lower than the forecast. So once again, the federal government had to take charge of these highways to avoid damages and to prompt use by the drivers. So against this background, it is understandable that priority is being given to what are considered strategic projects. Since there currently is a toll-free highway linkage, the city of Durango in Mexico with the Pacific coast, an alternative route already exists. So, without considering the alternative route, the federal government spent some amount of money with the private partnership to build this road and also damaged some amount of environmental things. So it's not a high specific link, and journey time are considerably due to difficult topography of the terrain. The project has been made with different ideas. In conclusion, it may be said that this particular environmental impact statement was prepared properly and in a highly exhaustive fashion, but that the project has not gone ahead due to reasons unrelated to corresponding environmental report. So here what the problem is, once the environmental report is not been properly given beginning, later it was given, and alternative route is available, and this project made into a huge loss to the federal government. So before that, the conclusion, so we can say that environmental impact statement should be prepared properly and exhaustive fashion so that the project implementation could not affect the environment. So we can refer these things. Thank you.